Hi, folks. Welcome to Deviance. This lecture is going to deal primarily with um, Chapter 1 and Section 1 material. Um, before we get this started, I know you're not participating specifically in this lecture like you would in a face-to-face course, but I want you to think of um, some acts of deviance. Kind of keep them in your mind um, for examples as we move through the material. What in your mind is deviance? And this is extremely important because deviance, in many respects, um, is a social construct, and what one person might consider deviance, as we'll find out over the course of the semester, another might not. So just because you think something's deviant doesn't mean that everybody thinks it's deviant. So when you're thinking about deviance, you need to start wrapping your mind around some important questions that you have to ask yourself when you're trying to define whether what you're looking at is deviant behavior. First thing is, who is it that is actually being accused of deviant behavior? Are poor people and people of color more likely to be seen as deviant than wealthier people that come from the dominant group? So, who is an important question? What is another important question? What are we looking at, and is that considered deviant behavior? The concept of nudity, as we'll find out in the example of the Freeman Arts Council, makes us wonder what exactly is deviant. Because in one case, deviance is clearly not considered a deviant act, or nudity, I'm sorry, nudity is in one case not considered a deviant act, but then in another case it is. Where is another a question that you have to ask yourself. Um, Nudity in uh, San Francisco might not be seen as a deviant act, but nudity in a small town like Sullivan, Missouri would be. And of course, when is an important factor as well. What this is really indicating is that deviance changes depending on who you're talking about, what acts you're talking about, where they happen, and when they happen. So, in consideration to these important facts, one of the examples the textbook gives you is it takes a look at the Fremont Arts Council and a festival that they have been having in Fremont since 1972. And there's a lot of restrictions on what you can do at the festival. But one of the things that you are able to do is you're able to display publicly yourself nude. So you find a large contingency that attends this festival, come rain nor shine, every year in their birthday suits. And people anticipate it, they know it's coming, and they don't have a problem with it. On the other hand, the book gives an example of a flasher in a local park, and how there were complaints that there was a person that was exposing himself to people riding their bikes down trails or running or just walking along a public space, and they're confronted with a gentleman that exposes himself. In this case, this is seen as a deviant act, and the police set up a sting, and they catch the man for exposing himself, and all of a sudden he is arrested, and the law starts to work on him. And I have uh, to warn you, exposing yourself publicly in this type of way can put you on the special lists that no one wants to be on, the sex offenders list. And now all of a sudden, public nudity is being constructed in a totally different light. And the consequences for this particular individual are severe, whereas the consequences for a large group of people getting on their bicycles and riding around an arts festival in Fremont are non-existent. That's how deviance can be seen in different lights depending on where you're at, who you're talking about, what they're doing, and when they're doing it. The authors in the textbook offer several conceptions of deviance. Is deviance objectively given, or is it subjectively problematic? Is there a normative conception versus a relativist conception? There's a positivist perspective versus the constructionist perspective. All of these conceptions are similar, but they just use different language to explain what is going on with deviance. And if you've taken any other sociology courses, you've clearly come in contact with this objectivist perspective versus the subjectivist perspective. So when we're talking about objectively given deviance, what we're really talking about is normative or positivistic deviance. And what this is really saying is it's assuming a general set of norms, rules of behavior that guide people's action, and that these norms actually exist. There are three types of norms that govern behavior. There are folkways, which are everyday norms, basic mannerisms, simple daily activities, and don't really cause a ruckus. This is your you pick your nose in public type of deviant behavior. Nobody's going to arrest you for picking your nose in the general population. Nobody might say anything at all, but it doesn't make it any less deviant. Mores are moral norms, and they have a moral connection, which is saying that they will upset people more than folkways. It might be socially unacceptable. Cheating on your girlfriend is a social more that is not acceptable. People might become upset when you do it, but once again, they're not going to throw you in jail for it. And then there are laws which are backed by official sanctions. Violations of these rules, which are ultimately understood by the majority of the group as being legally binding, can result in some severe consequences. Taking, for example, the gentleman that was exposing himself to unsuspecting joggers and walkers and bikers. Well, there are some laws that prevent you from engaging in that type of behavior. And when you do engage in that type of behavior, you could be fined, you can be thrown in jail. There's all kinds of consequences that are legally binding. The subjectively problematic conception is a bit different. We also know this as the social constructionist perspective or the reactionist relativist perspective. In this case, deviance is constructed based on the interactions of those in society. Behaviors and or conditions are not inherently they're not inherently deviant, but they are defined as such by the social norms of the time. And the idea of norms and deviance are constructed by immediate society. When you're thinking about these types of behaviors and how they're constructed, what are some examples of behaviors that you might think are offensive, but someone else might not? Well, one is cleanliness or the way a person smells. I was just reading an article that a Caucasian man complained about the smell of a Nigerian woman on a plane. And because the complaint was registered, the Nigerian woman was asked to depart the plane. Now, here you have a classic example of one culture or one individual from a culture that finds offensive another person from another culture. The behaviors of both of them could be acceptable within their own cultures, but they're different. And the way a person smells can be offensive to someone else. Another example I've known over many years, many exchange students coming from the Middle East, where historically, well, the conditions in the Middle East as far as weather conditions are very arid. They have water problems in the Middle East, and bathing is not always it's not something that's always done, especially not like it is in the United States, where you might find people in the United States taking showers 2 times a day. You might find those people in Saudi Arabia taking showers once a week. This can create a offensive smell from the people that take showers less often and have grown up taking showers less often. They might cover that smell up with cologne, which in turn might make it more offensive to the culture or people from the culture that they're visiting. And ultimately, you might find somebody asking you to take a shower because you're no longer in the Middle East where water is scarce. You're now in the United States where you can easily take a shower.